welcome to this week's episode of This Week. Today we are going to talk about Joe Rogan's potential cancellation and how we can try to stop that, because he's the biggest podcaster in the world. Another, Sony's Bungie acquisition and which gaming studio and which big tech companies pose an actual threat to Microsoft's Xbox Game Pass. Third, Meta's decline in market cap and stock price. So let's start with Joe Rogan. About 270 doctors came out to cancel Joe Rogan, and then most people found out that out of 270 doctors, most of them weren't doctors at all. Some of them were, turns out, some of them were professors, some of them were researchers, some of them were dentists, students, and veterinary doctors. And that was that. Then Neil Young, some boomer, I don't know, came out and basically threatened Spotify. Either they keep Joe Rogan or they keep him, because misinformation, right? And then this whole thing gets covered by media. Then Neil Young leaves and he promotes Amazon Music and he also thanks Apple. Now, you can protest misinformation if you want to, like vaccine misinformation, that's okay, but you don't then just go out and promote Amazon Music. It's like, how? It's didn't it just come out a few years ago that they don't even get toilet breaks, Amazon warehouse workers? So if you have a problem with misinformation, how are you okay with how are you okay with that? Or some other person like Joni Mitchell leaves. Now media is in full swing against Rogan, and Spotify's market cap drops by around $2 billion. Now that may be because of Joe Rogan, but it also might be because of general market crashing down. So many of the stocks on the stock market are down, and amongst them is Spotify. Then Joe Rogan comes out with an explanation, says, "Hello friends," and posts a video about this whole situation, says he's a Neil Young fan, he's a Joni Mitchell fan, and he feels sad about the whole thing, and he's basically like, hey, I'm just having conversations, and tells people about how he should structure his guest, how he'll try to structure guests in future. He'll have one person on, then he'll have another person with opposite views on, which I think is a good strategy. You know, I'm not that big of a podcaster, so I don't know. Now other musicians start leaving, and media is now going through the Joe Rogan Experience catalog. They find racist content, they find transphobic content, and that's that, I guess. And Joe Rogan says sorry about the whole thing. And so let's start with Neil Young, shall we? His music catalog owned by a hedge fund called Blackstone, and that Blackstone has some links with the big pharma, particularly Pfizer. So is it moral thing? Like, can people just do things out of morality? And here's the thing, it's like cynicism says follow the money, and in this case it it's owned by a hedge fund called Blackstone, and it has links with big pharma. And most of the corporate media trying to cancel Joe Rogan is also sponsored by big pharma, particularly Pfizer. You'll find many compilations of this on the internet, like sponsored by Pfizer. It's like, okay. So cynicism says follow the money, but there's a part of me like that wants to be innocent, and like, why can't they just do things because out of morality or whatever? Why is it always about money? And I think it's, my opinion is, I think it's okay to have various other guests on that do not necessarily share majority consensus, especially when those guests are experts in their fields. Joe Rogan mentioned in his Hello Friends video Dr. Robert Malone and Peter McCullough. I think these two. I know Robert Malone owns something about 6 or 9 vaccine patents about mRNA vaccine. So the Robert Malone guy knows his stuff, Dr. Robert Malone. And just saying misinformation doesn't solve anything. So here's my advice, expert advice to biggest to biggest podcaster in the world. Send a public invitation to Dr. Anthony Fauci. Have Dr. Anthony Fauci on. Send at least a public invite. If he accepts, great, talk to that guy. And I think few years ago he did that with Jack Dorsey. He did one with like Jack Dorsey, and he got a lot of blowback from his episode with Jack Dorsey. And then he had another journalist on, and then he had that journalist and Jack Dorsey and one of Jack Dorsey's lawyers at Twitter, and this was 4 people podcast. So I think he should probably try to do with one podcast with Dr. Fauci alone, and do one with Dr. Malone and Dr. Fauci probably. That is my expert advice to the biggest podcaster in the world. So, Sony buys Bungie, creator of Halo, which is an Xbox classic, and creator of game called Destiny, and few others, for $3.6 billion. And people are panicking about consolidation in gaming industry. And there were many people who have their own takes. The one that I came across recently on Twitter is called it's Adam Conover, I think that's his name is. He was famous for Adam Ruins Everything, and his take was Microsoft is trying Amazon strategy to monopoly with Xbox Game Pass. So basically, sell stuff for cheaper than your competitors, drive out all your competitors, and then you win. And I have to give out a disclosure. I'm a free market capitalist through and through. But if governments are going to do their jobs properly, I'll be recommending acquisitions in nihilistic and cynical way. And I don't think Microsoft is trying Amazon strategy. Maybe they are. I don't think they are going to be monopoly. There's Sony, there's Tencent. They all have bigger revenue streams than Microsoft. They earn a lot more. Even with Activision Blizzard acquisition, Sony and Tencent will be making a lot more money than Microsoft. And Apple does not produce any games at all, and they make a lot more money than Sony, Microsoft combined, something like that. So it's Microsoft is far from monopoly here, and there's definitely some worry, but and that's why people have been saying that Sony should acquire studios to counteract Microsoft's Activision Blizzard acquisition. So many names came up: Take-Two, EA, Ubisoft, and Konami, Square Enix, Sega, etc. But here's the thing: if Sony acquires these studios, they'll only get IP or intellectual property, and I've said it, I think in previous video, the biggest acquisition to go after Microsoft is Valve. Valve has its originals, and most importantly, Valve has significant user base with biggest gaming digital store on PCs, on Windows. It is called Steam. Now Valve has also their VR, Valve Index, and HTC Vive. HTC Vive was, I think, based on Valve Index, and these VR headsets are probably the only successful ones other than Oculus, and Oculus is owned by Facebook, now called Meta. So they have VR, they have originals, they have biggest gaming digital store called Steam on Windows, but they've also come up with Steam Proton, where they translate Windows games to make them work on Linux desktops. So who are Microsoft's biggest big tech competitors? Sony, Tencent, Google, Meta, and Apple. Now we'll have to rule out Tencent for this acquisition because Chinese Communist Party really hates gamers, and they have cracked down on Chinese big tech companies, including Tencent. Now I'm going to rule out Apple because Apple just likes to make things exclusive, and Steam is biggest gaming store on Windows, and most of the games are really native to x86 Windows, which is Intel based Windows or AMD based Windows laptops and desktops, and translating them to ARM Max, that is M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, etc. is double the translation of Steam Proton, and will take performance hit even if it is achieved at all. So I'm ruling out Apple. I'll also rule out Meta because they're under government scrutiny in Europe and in North America. So who's left? Google, Amazon, and Sony to acquire Valve. Amazon is less likely because it gives them store and they have Twitch, but they lack the wider platform for vertical integration like Google and Sony. Google competes with Microsoft on search and advertising, consumer and enterprise productivity suites, Google Workspace, Google Docs. Google also has operating systems on laptops and desktops with Linux-based Chromebooks. And what a coincidence, Steam Proton translates Windows games to Linux. So Linux Chromebooks, Steam Proton, Google and Microsoft compete, and there you go. That's how Google can try to acquire Steam Proton or get Steam Proton by acquiring Valve. But the thing is, Google's gaming strategy has been a disaster. Web streaming only with no free games on subscription, and requires people to give up all their previous game library or buy them again. So you have to give up all your previous gaming library, or you have to buy them again, spend extra money, and you have to pay monthly subscription, and you're not going to get any free games on that subscription. Seems like a terrible deal, and no wonder Stadia is failing, and Steam Proton and acquiring Valve will give Google a lot better chance to compete with Windows and Microsoft. People already use Google Chrome on Windows. People who use Windows most likely have an Android phone. People won't need to buy new games to transition to Google's gaming if they have the Steam game store, and they can just buy the subscription if they want to play their Steam games on their phone or on their TVs, etc. And gives Google a huge advantage over Microsoft, since people who use Windows use it because budget computers and office suites. Google already competes here with Google Chrome, Chrome OS and Google Workspace. Gaming, Valve and gaming team up will crack the whole Windows for gaming PCs. That will be shattered. Windows will have no longer a monopoly on PC gaming. Exclusive Windows software for professionals. So Google will get budget computers, and Google will compete with Microsoft for budget computers. Google will compete with Microsoft for gaming computers. Professional software, maybe they will, maybe they will not. So 2 out of 3 things that makes Windows special, Google will get those. Another potential buyer, Sony. Sony is trying to bring its exclusives to PC, starting with God of War. And if Sony acquires Valve, Sony gets a huge boost to compete with Microsoft with exclusives like Half-Life, then Counter-Strike and Portal and others. They get a user base with biggest gaming store on Windows, that is the Steam game store. There's nothing Microsoft can do about it, because EU and US governments are putting big tech under scrutiny. Microsoft has so far avoided it, but if they try to do some weird stuff that like they're trying to do with how they're trying to promote with Microsoft Edge over Google Chrome, if they try to do that with Valve, they cannot try to do that with Valve because governments are just putting big tech companies under scrutiny. So that will be an acquisition. Sony also gets VR with Valve Index, though only successful alternative to Oculus, which is now owned by Facebook. With the upcoming Steam Deck, Sony can compete with Xbox Series S with Steam Deck's price, and compete with Nintendo as well with Steam Deck's form factor and price. So Steam Deck, VR, originals, biggest gaming store, and an alternative to Windows with Steam Proton for gaming PCs. Valve should be a top priority for any big tech company who wants to compete with Microsoft for gaming. It gives anyone who acquires it IP, VR, Steam Deck, biggest gaming store, Steam Proton. So people have been recommending which studio should Sony buy to compete with Microsoft, and other studios and other companies will give Sony only IP, but acquiring Valve will give them a lot more and huge leverage on Windows and gaming PCs. Alright, third topic. So Meta has been in the news recently. They lost about 25% of their market cap. That's about $230 billion of their market cap after their conference call. Mark Zuckerberg lost about $29 billion. Meta's Q4 report showed that Facebook users declined for the first time in its history. They were from 1.93 billion users to 1.929 billion users. That's about 10 million users. But still, this is the first time that the daily active users have declined on Facebook. So the company Meta, they have blamed this on the rise of TikTok and how younger generations have just moved away from Facebook products and TikTok and moved towards TikTok. And Facebook hasn't been acquiring young users, but even Instagram's Reels hasn't been able to stop the rise of TikTok. And here's the issue I have. If you look at history of social media companies, there are mainstream social media companies and there are some relatively niche or relatively like special media company social media companies. So what are the mainstream media companies? Mainstream social media companies. AOL was first one. Second one were MySpace in some parts of the world and Orkut in some parts of the world. Then there was Facebook. And remember, when the new mainstream social media company appears, old one dies out. So AOL died out during MySpace and Orkut era, and MySpace and Orkut died out during Facebook era. And Facebook didn't die during Instagram, but it has become slowly irrelevant in many parts of the world. And Snapchat was supposed to be the next one who would take out Instagram and be the mainstream social media. But Instagram just copied Snapchat's special features, basically stories, and they killed off Snapchat. And they have tried to kill TikTok. But here's the thing. Facebook's anti-competitive strategy has been relatively simple. So either you buy the competition, which is what they did with Instagram and WhatsApp, or you bury the competition, which is what they did with Snapchat, and which is what they are trying to do with TikTok, where they copy features of their competitors and make users stay on their platform. What are the other platforms? Twitter and YouTube, and Pinterest and Reddit. Of course, these are also massive platforms, especially YouTube. YouTube is bigger than Facebook when it comes to user base. But YouTube is not just a social media. It has a lot of social media features, like it has ability for anyone to just create an account and upload content. No gatekeeping. They have like feature, they have comments feature, they have share features, they have a lot of social media features, YouTube. But YouTube is also the de facto search engine for videos. So if it's not a TV show, if it's not a movie, it's not a porn, it's not a documentary, or it's not some gore video, then that video is most likely available on YouTube. So, and same with Twitter, right? Twitter is, you can tweet stuff, but a lot of people get their news from Twitter. They just see their feed, see the news article, see the headline in their tweet, they click on the news article, they read stuff, or they just read tweets to get their news. And what's the use of Facebook or any of the Facebook owned companies? I really want to ask this. Twitter, great for news. YouTube, great for videos. What about Instagram? Instagram has images, right? Well, Instagram has images, but if you want to search images, you're going to use Google Images, not Instagram images. If you want to save your images or back up your images, you're going to use Apple Photos, Google Photos, or Microsoft OneDrive or Dropbox. You're not using Instagram to back up all your photos. You're not using Instagram to search for new photos. Instagram is just a platform to share your photos with people close to you. And perhaps even strangers. So it's not a tool like Twitter or YouTube, but it's just social media, Instagram. What about Facebook? Well, Facebook has been great for people who lost contact with each other before the internet. So think about older millennials, baby boomers, and all those people, Gen X and baby boomers. So they might have lost contact with their high school friends and all that, and suddenly they can just search their friend's name on Facebook. Now they're reconnecting with their old friends, right? And that reconnections have occurred, and Facebook is no longer a tool. And same thing with the metaverse that they're trying to do. Same thing with reels that trying to do with TikTok. Thing about TikTok is, right now it's trending, but just like all those mainstream trending social media apps, it will decline. Like AOL, MySpace, Facebook, it will start to decline. So I don't know why Facebook is going for social media only rather than turning existing social media into tools. So Instagram is supposed to be about images, supposed to be. And why not introduce tools like private photos upload or photos backup service like Google Photos and Apple Photos, that where some of these photos can be kept private. Why not introduce search feature for images so that Instagram competes with Google Images? Of course, Zuckerberg is smarter than just an idiot recording and just reading the news and recording this stuff. But the thing is, it's kind of obvious that unless these social media companies become tools, they're not going to last. History has proved that with AOL, Orkut, MySpace, and now Facebook. So they lost about 10 million users. They blamed it on rise of TikTok. They also lost $10 billion in revenue thanks to Apple's pro-privacy changes in iOS, where people opt in for them to be tracked. You have to ask people if they want to be tracked or not. With the new iOS 15, I think it's called 14 or 15, they introduced that feature, and Facebook earned a lot of money tracking its users outside of Facebook and Instagram apps. Like, targeted advertising is fine if they are targeting based on what you do inside the app, but targeting my behavior or seeing my behavior outside of Facebook app is honestly disgusting, and they deserve this. Or anyone who is trying to target their users or their customers, in this case users, outside of their apps, around all their activity on their, whether it's on their phones, whether it's on their web browsers, on computers, I think it's disgusting, and Apple has done the right move, and therefore Meta has lost $10 billion. It's like, okay, you make targeted advertising stuff and you target me you collect data on me based on what I do, but you're also collecting data on me when I'm not using your service. I think that is disgusting, and they really deserve to lose their money in this case. Now, argument can be made cynically that Apple is gatekeeping their iOS platform, because I think they have their own ad platform on their on their app store, in their news app, and few others. So what Apple has done basically is, in a cynical way, they have cut off others from tracking their users, but they are also tracking their users. Of course, it's not as big or as pervasive or as disgusting as Meta. Of course not, but that is happening. Honestly, I only meta service I use is WhatsApp, and that's because WhatsApp is big and famous here. Stopped using Facebook. I stopped using Instagram. A lot of people my age, they use Instagram, and I've lost touch with a lot of people because of not using Instagram. But fuck 'em. Like no, 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 no. Anyway, the metaverse strategy started with acquiring Oculus. Now it's called Reality Lab, Meta Reality Lab, something like that. And that is not profitable as well. And people are not adopting metaverse as fast as Mark Zuckerberg would like. So we don't know what happens to Meta from here on out. Will it survive long enough to transition to metaverse? Will people even accept Meta's metaverse rather than Google or Apple or Xbox metaverse or whatever? What is that? So will people accept Meta's metaverse over Apple, Google or Xbox metaverse? What do you think? Well, that's it for today. If you like this episode, share it with someone you know. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.